Jagex recently announced a huge nerf, up to a 60% reduction to common loot of Elder God Wars dungeon bosses, Raksha, and the Wilderness Flash events. Most notably, Zamorak, the Lord of Chaos, will see a reduction in common loot of 50 to 60%. That is an absolutely huge nerf and definitely will affect the GP per hour there. This update will be released on May 12th and has been communicated as an improvement to long-term health and sustainability of the game, and also to help improve the skilling profitability. I have a lot of mixed emotions and a lot of thoughts on this change, and I want to discuss my thoughts here and some solutions that I have to RuneScape's skilling profitability issue and just game health in general. First of all, I don't agree with this update being communicated as improving skilling profitability. It is pretty common knowledge that the Elder God Wars bosses drop a significant amount of alchables compared to other bosses in the game, especially Zamorak. This has been a problem for years and has quite possibly been a root cause to inflation in RuneScape, and you can kind of see the impact the Elder God Wars dungeon has had on bonds at least, which is a fairly good metric to show inflation. Bonds were just under 30 million GP when the Elder God Wars dungeon bosses were first released, and you can see they've just been climbing ever since and are hovering around 140 mil right now. Now, specifically, I think Zamorak and the Arch-Glacier are the main causes for a lot of this inflation, a lot of this just alchables and free GP being added into the game. Looking at a 300% enrage Zamorak kill, you make around 7.8 mil per kill. If you exclude the uniques, you'll make around 4 to 4.1 mil per kill just in common loot right now. You can see that almost half of the profit you are making from this common loot is alchables. And then if you also include the Onyx bolt tips and Hydrix bolt tips, which both can be created into bolts, which then are only held up by their alch price. So quite often these bolt tips are just turned into bolts and alched. Well, if you include that, then 3.25 of the 4.1 mil in common loot is alchables. And so you can see that Zamorak is really just shooting a lot of alchables into the game. Now, if the common loot table is dropped by the proposed 60% on the high end, then the GP per kill will drop by about 32% for the average 300% Zamorak and Rage kill. This does exclude the Bow of the Last Guardian increasing in price, which is a possibility because of this update, but overall this is still a massive nerf to the GP per hour that Zamorak is going to be giving players. With the Arch-Glacier, which is the other notable drop, normal mode is seeing a 45% to 60% reduction in common loot, and since you don't really make any money off of uniques at normal mode Arch-Glacier, and it's really just used as an AFK boss at 0 and 1 mechanic, this is essentially maybe like a 53% drop in GP per hour for normal mode Arch-Glacier. So pretty substantial, but it's only going to affect the people maybe AFKing this boss for money or for charms, which I totally get why that isn't really a great thing for the game. The hard mode version of the Arch-Glacier and Carapac are also seeing a reduction in loot. I would say the Arch-Glacier does give a lot of alchables and really just a lot of loot in general. So seeing it being reduced by 10 to 30%, yeah, it's going to be a bit unfortunate. It will probably lower the GP per hour for Arch-Glacier because of it, but it does make sense. And for Carapac, hard mode being reduced by 8 to 10%, it will probably have an overall impact on the GP per hour of maybe something like 5%, maybe less. But overall, it does sort of make sense. There's a lot of alchables for both bosses and just all Elder God Wars bosses in general. There was a brief mention of some unique or rare drops being slightly buffed, so I really hope that is the case, at least for Arch-Glacier. I think that makes so much sense to reduce the common loot from the boss and slightly increase the rare drop chance at like the Frozen Core of Lang, or just the rare drop table in general, because the drop rates on Arch-Glacier, that's a whole other problem. They're extremely hard to get. So I do definitely agree with that change, but in general, we will be seeing a reduction in just GP per hour from all of these bosses. Now, honestly, I don't have too much of an issue with the drop in GP per hour. A lot of these bosses, they just drop a lot of alchables, and I think that could help with the inflation problem in RuneScape. But to say it is part of this skilling profitability issue just isn't really valid, I don't think. I think the real issue with skilling profitability is the demand for skilling items. And this really has to do a lot with MTX. Now, the main issue with skilling profitability is that players don't need resources to train skills. I play on a main account, and although I've never spent money or even bonds on treasure hunter keys, I get a lot of free keys by just being a member, doing my daily challenges. Sometimes I spend my odd mints when there's a good promo, and this has allowed me to train many skills to 99 or even 120 almost exclusively from treasure hunter or daily challenge XP. Looking at my skill, I spent a double XP training Herblore to 120 with proteins that I stocked up, and probably gained something like 50 or 60 million Herblore XP from that. I didn't have to buy herbs or unfinished potions or secondary ingredients, so that's a huge loss in demand for those skilling items. Cooking, I went from level 100 to 111 fully from daily challenge XP over this past year. I've dumped a bunch of bonus XP into fletching and crafting when training those skills. Yes, I did buy a lot of uncut dragon stones when I was training crafting. For fletching, I used broad arrowheads, so I did sort of use some resources there, but doing it all on double XP and also using portables, which is a whole other issue, it allowed me to not use as many gems as I normally would have. Now, portables, that is another huge issue, I think, with the demand for skilling items. The fact that I can fletch items on a portable fletcher while using a Brooch of the Gods to not only giving me 20% more XP, but also a 20% chance to save resources is kind of crazy. You can even do it in the Ranger's Workroom, which has a more modest boost of 5% fletching XP and a 2% chance to save resources, but everything added together just makes players not need to use as many resources. I like the fact that you don't have to train as long with these XP boosts, but having the ability to save resources is probably bad game design. You want players to burn through resources they accumulate, and having this pretty large chance to save resources, it likely isn't helping the sustainability or health of the game, or just skilling profitability in general. It also kind of ruins the whole skilling diversity thing and forces players to stock up bonus XP, proteins, and all gather on World 84 at Fort 4 and 3 on double XP to get all the Pulse Core boosts, the Scepter of Enchantment Slam, the Coin Flip XP boost, Rock of Resilience boost, your Premier Artifact boost, etc., to gain 3 or 4 times the base XP on anything you're doing. And I used to think in the past that MTX hasn't really affected me. Like I said, I don't spend money on Treasure Hunter, and I only use my daily keys to get a bit of XP here and there and stock up on some proteins. But Treasure Hunter really has affected everyone that plays the game, just by the fact that skilling supplies aren't in demand anymore because of all this free XP that impacts everyone. Even Iron Man accounts are arguably affected by nerfs like this, and part of the motivation to go through with the nerf is to make skilling items more profitable. Well, maybe they would be more profitable if main accounts actually needed them to train their skills. There really is two sides to this skilling profitability issue, and it's not just hurting Iron Man and PVM players by reducing the supply from PVM and boss drops, but it's also improving the demand for these items. And in my opinion, that's the best way to do it, to remove or decrease some of the free treasure hunter XP, whether that be prismatic lamps or prismatic stars, or stop adding protein items into the game. Maybe then some better skilling methods can then be released to improve the supply from skilling and actually add some better skilling money makers to the game. I think that would go a long way in improving the health of RuneScape 3. You know, I really love RuneScape 3. It's always been a part of my life as a player and now as a content creator for the past 7 years actually. I really hope Jagex doesn't just try to fix this game health issue or skilling profitability issue by reducing PVM drops. That not only hurts the PVM players and the Iron Man players, but it also just only looks at the demand side of skilling as well. I know they're aware of this issue, that Treasure Hunter XP is really hurting the game's longevity and health, and I imagine the JMods want to fix this issue, but ultimately, you know, it is a business, and Treasure Hunter makes the company a lot of money. So we'll just have to wait and see if Jagex will do anything about it.